Okay, so we're on to our final unit for physical activity and health. We'll be looking at exercise for psychological well-being. We'll look at how physical activity influences mood and all of the other benefits it offers for our mental health. So a few components of psychological well-being that we're going to look at today are mood, anxiety, depression, self-esteem, cognition, which is the functioning of our brain, and also pro-social behavior. And we'll get into that when we get towards the end of this unit. So exercise for psychological well-being, physical activity contributes to many different aspects of psychological health in many different ways. Firstly, it can help in the treatment of mental illness and disorders, as well as the prevention of mental illness and disorders. So if you have depression or anxiety, exercise can help treat that. It can also help prevent it if you don't have it yet. We can also improve mental and physical well-being in those with mental illnesses or disorders, and we can improve mental and physical well-being of the general population as well. So let's look at some statistics for depression and anxiety. Approximately 1 in 7 people will experience depression in their lifetime. It's a little more prevalent for females than it is for males, so 18% of females and 12% of males. And then about 1 in 4 people will experience an anxiety condition in their lifetime, so anxiety is a little more common. Again, females at greater risk at 32% compared to 20% of males. So let's look at depression first. Now, depression is a very common mental health disorder. It's characterized by that persistent feeling of sadness and hopelessness and a general lack of interest or pleasure in daily activities. And oftentimes it's actually accompanied by physical symptoms such as changes in sleep, appetite, and energy levels. Now, this graph here shows an association between inactivity and incidence of depression. So physical activity was characterized as either low, medium, or high. And you can see that the risk of developing depression was significantly greater for both men and women. This included both men and women who were low active compared to those who were highly active. So being active decreases our risk of developing depression. Now, if we already have depression, we can look at this graph here. This comes from some research that did 16 weeks of aerobic exercise versus medication, so an antidepressant medication, which is called sertraline, versus placebo, which is where they gave the participants some medication, but the medication was probably just like a sugar tablet. So they thought they were getting something, but they weren't actually getting anything at all. That's what placebo means. It means it's like almost like a trick to make them think that perhaps they're getting the good medication, but actually they're getting nothing at all. And they did this with people who had depressive symptoms. And what they found was really interesting. They found that exercise resulted in greater reductions in depressive symptoms compared to the placebo, which is quite obvious. So compared to doing nothing, exercise had greater reductions in depressive symptoms. But also they found that exercise was equally as effective as the antidepressant drug. So those doing exercise who weren't taking any medication had just as much of a decrease in their depressive symptoms as those who were taking the antidepressant drug. So exercise just as effective as antidepressants in this case. Now, there's some biological and psychological or psychosocial effects of exercise on patients with depression. So in the biological section, this describes that when we exercise, we have an increase in endorphins, an increase in serotonins, and your brain sort of gets these endorphins and serotonins when you do some physical exercise. And they are kind of like neurotransmitters or chemical sort of messengers that help relieve pain and stress. So when we exercise, we increase the endorphins, we increase the serotonin that actually decreases stress and pain within the brain itself. So that's one reason why exercise can decrease suppressive symptoms. It also helps to decrease cortisol within the body, and cortisol we know is a stress hormone. So if we have this decrease in the stress hormone, that's going to help to relieve these depressive symptoms. We also have psychosocial benefits of exercise on improving depressive symptoms. So when we exercise, particularly if we're learning new skills, we have mastery of that skill. It's like you're learning something new, you're gaining a skill, and that can improve depressive symptoms. We have social interaction, which of course improves depressive symptoms. And we also have distraction. So a few key things in terms of like the social aspect and the psychological aspect of exercise, which can all help to improve depressive symptoms. Okay, we'll look at anxiety now. So anxiety is a mental health condition that's characterized by excessive worry, fear, or nervousness about the future, and it's often accompanied by physical symptoms, that being heightened awareness of your heart rate. You know, if you felt anxiety before, you can feel your heart rate racing in your chest. You might get sweaty palms and just some overall tension in your body. Now, there's two different types of anxiety. There's state anxiety and there's trait anxiety. So state anxiety refers to an acute, so short-term psychological response to an event or a stimulus. This is like anxiety towards a situation, like public speaking. On the other hand, we have trait anxiety, which is more of a chronic, long-term tendency to become anxious, and this is more like your generalized anxiety disorder. So you can have just anxiety about a race that you're doing or a speech that you're giving, and that's state anxiety. But if you're just anxious on a daily basis, that is trait anxiety. So let's see how exercise affects these two different types of anxiety. So in state anxiety, this is the one where it's regarding a specific situation, like public speaking. So one single exercise session can reduce state anxiety, and the greatest effect is when the exercise is aerobic. So let's say you have a presentation in class at lunchtime. It's a good idea to maybe go do some aerobic exercise, like a run or a bit of a power walk, in order to reduce that state anxiety regarding that particular topic. So you might want to go for a run in the morning before your presentation in the afternoon. In terms of trait anxiety, this is the one where it sticks around, it's day to day. So exercise can reduce trait anxiety. So if we're doing exercise chronic, remember long-term exercise, that can reduce the symptoms of trait anxiety. And the greatest effect is seen when the exercise program is at least 10 weeks long. So we want to make sure that you're exercising consistently for at least 10 weeks to see some effect. And you should make sure that the exercise sessions are at least 40 minutes long. So 40 minutes, just around 40 minutes. So you don't want to be going too far under 40 minutes. You don't want to be going too far above 40 minutes. Anything too stressful is going to, can increase that cortisol level as well. So you have to be careful of that. But around 10 weeks long and around 40-minute sessions. In terms of the actual effects, what happens is that when we exercise, we have this reduced activity or reactivity to stresses. So we're able to deal with stress in a better way, basically. So those who do exercise generally have a lower heart rate, have lower systolic and diastolic pressure, and lower muscle tension, all which reduce the effects of that anxious feeling. Now, panic disorders are a whole different sort of ball game. So if you know anyone who has panic attacks, physical activity can improve the symptoms of panic attacks, but it's not as much researched as general anxiety. However, it's really interesting in people with panic disorders, oftentimes they actually avoid exercise because they think they might panic about a life-threatening event. And this might ring true for some of you. Have you ever exercised and felt your heart rate and you can hear it in your ears, and that almost gives you anxiety about your heart rate being high, and you think, oh, it shouldn't be that high, it's beating so fast. So it's interesting when we think about exercise and panic disorders, we have to be cognizant, or we have to consider the fact that exercise can actually bring on a panic disorder as well. All right, if we think about mood, so mood is a sustained emotional state. So it's how you're feeling emotionally over a period of time that can last for hours or days or even longer. And it influences how you as a person experience life. So emotions are more short-lived and tied to a specific event, but mood is more a person's outlook and behavior over a longer period. So remember, emotions and mood are slightly different. Emotions is more short-term, mood is more long-term. So there's positive mood, which is and negative mood. And mood can be influenced by a variety of factors. Firstly, it can be influenced by biological factors like hormone changes, especially in women through the menstrual cycle. Hormones can have a big impact on mood. It can be influenced by environmental factors. So the weather is a big contributor to mood for some people. Maybe you really hate winter and it just puts you in a negative mood for 3 months. And then also psychological factors, so your individual thoughts that shape your mood and your outlook on life. So in terms of exercise and mood, aerobic exercise results in decreased tension, decreased depression, increased vigor. So vigor is like your energy. It's the body's ability to energize itself. Decreased fatigue, decreased confusion, and decreased anger, overall resulting in a more positive mood. Remember, I'm sure you all feel good after you exercise, and that's generally what we're talking about here. So physical activity is consistently associated with a positive mood. Exercise has a great effect on mood and psychological well-being. It really helps our mental health. But the greatest effect, the best thing to do if you want to improve your mood, is to do exercise that is goal focused on some sort of form of personal improvement or mastering a skill. For example, if you want to learn how to do a handstand, going to the gym, doing your exercises for your shoulders, and then practicing handstands. Especially when you do this in a group, that's when exercise has the best effect on mood. You're learning something, you're mastering a skill, you're doing it in some sort of social group environment. That's when we're going to see the best effect of exercise on mood. So maybe in S&C, you're learning a new exercise, or you're learning some sort of skill like, I don't know, perhaps like some sort of calisthenics or like a lever or something. That's when you're going to have the best positive effect on mood. So now we're going to look at self-esteem. So self-esteem is important to consider when we're looking at mental health and well-being, because it's very closely associated with our emotional stability. And low self-esteem features in many forms of mental illness. So if we have low self-esteem, that's going to predispose us to many different mental illnesses like depression and anxiety, etc. So there's many different ways that involvement in exercise and sport might promote self-esteem. So when we exercise, we have improvements in fitness, in our physical condition, which can help self-esteem. We have improvements in perhaps the way that we see our body, which can improve self-esteem. We have improvements in physical strength. We also can build this sense of belonging and sense of significance, especially if we're exercising as part of a team, like we're in a team sport, which can all increase our physical and global self-esteem. So exercise, it promotes our self-worth, our self-perception, and therefore our self-esteem. Positive effects can be experienced by all age groups. So whether you're an adolescent, an adult, or an older adult, you can have these positive effects of exercise on self-esteem. But the greatest effect is for females particularly. So females have a really big positive effect of self-esteem when they exercise, and that's generally because they score lower on self-confidence and body image, self-worth, and self-esteem in the first place. So because females generally are lower on that scale, they have more space to move upwards. And if they've got more space to move upwards, they're going to have a big effect from exercise. Resistance training is actually shown to have the greatest effect in the short term on self-esteem. So if you are someone who struggles with self-esteem, get into the gym, do some resistance training, try to learn a new skill, and I'm sure that you'll see big benefits in no time. Okay, we're going to look at cognition quickly as well. So cognition is the way that our brain works. Now, physical activity, again, has a good positive influence on our cognition. In school-age children who do a lot of physical activity, there is relationships with IQ. So the more physical activity you do, perhaps the higher IQ you have, academic achievement, verbal and mathematic tests as well. So physical activity can increase our cognitive performance, especially in the younger years. So a big effect was shown for children aged 4 to 11 years compared to those aged 14 to 18 years. So if you know someone between 4 and 11 and they're struggling with their cognition, their concentration, their schoolwork, exercise is going to significantly affect that. So here again, we can see, so we've got two different graphs. The first one is maths achievement, and the second one is reading achievement. And they compared how students performed in maths and reading to their aerobic capacity. So aerobic capacity is along the bottom. And you can see the trend line. So the trend line is that black line running through all the dots. And you can see those lines in both of those graphs are running upwards to the right. And that tells me that the higher aerobic capacity, the higher achievement in maths or reading. So big positive effect of being physically active, having some aerobic fitness on physical activity within these early adolescent childhood years. If we look at older people and cognition, we can see in this graph here that physical activity has a positive effect on different cognitive measures. So there's a few different measures there. They are executive, controlled, spatial, and speed. And I'll go over what those mean. So executive controlled processes is things that generally, like the easiest way I can explain it is it's what people with ADHD struggle with. So like multitasking, dealing with ambiguity, etc. When we're doing exercise, we have big benefits in that area of our cognition. Controlled tasks include like reaction time. So I'm sure you all know what reaction time is with your ski racing. People who do exercise can see big effects in their reaction time. Spatial is generally memory, but memory in the terms of like if I showed you a drawing, and then I asked you to remember it, I took it away, and then asked you to replicate it. That's spatial functioning. And then speed, which is, again, a different measure of reaction time. I don't want you to worry about the difference between controlled and speed. They're just both reaction time measures. So really positive effect or positive relationship between physical activity for adults, especially older adults, in these areas of cognition, reaction time, multitasking, and memory. There was a positive effect seen for healthy adults, and also for adults with Alzheimer's disease, exercise can increase these cognitive functions as well. I also want to talk about a really interesting other part of cognition, and that is cognitive bias. Now, there's many different types of cognitive biases, and in the simplest form, they're ways or they're errors in the ways of our thinking that are hardwired into the human brain. And you're going to see what I mean by that in a second. So the one example I want to talk you through now is the attribution bias. So It's a really interesting psychological phenomenon, and it means that it's been sort of scientifically proven that we're more likely to attribute good things that happen to us to internal causes and bad things to external causes. I'm going to explain what I mean by that. If I make a soccer goal, it's because of my skill. I'm amazing. I was always going to get that soccer goal. I'm just the best at soccer. But if I miss the soccer goal, it's because of my shoes weren't tied correctly, or the wind was blowing, or something like that, or someone was in the way. So if something good happens to me, it's because of me. It's internal. But if something bad happens to me, it's because of someone else. It's external. For example, if you make a basketball shot, again, it's because you're the best at basketball. But if you miss that basketball shot, it's because someone was trying to distract you, or they moved the ring. I'm not sure, but you've always attributed it to external things. So when we see good, I guess the most sort of interesting part of this attribution bias is that it's totally reversed when we're looking at other people. So when we see good things happen to other people, we attribute it to external causes, and when we see bad things happen, we attribute it to internal causes. So again, let's go back to that soccer goal example. If I watch you get a soccer goal, I say, oh, it's lucky. You got it because you just got lucky then, or the keeper wasn't in the right position. They should have been in a different position, and then you wouldn't have made it. However, if I see you miss the soccer goal, I'll think in my head, oh, it's because you're terrible at soccer. Like, you just are bad. So it sort of explains why people, I guess, are kind of like haters. Like, you can't help it. It's a cognitive bias. It's in all of our brains. If something good happens to someone else, it's because of an external cause. If something bad happens to someone else, it is because of them. They choked. They can't handle the pressure. So another good example is that if you go bad in your exams for the IB, it's because I was a bad teacher and I didn't go through all the content with you. But if you go well in this subject in your IB exams, it's because you're so smart, you studied really hard, you're just talented. So I bet you'll catch yourself out next time you attribute someone's success or failure to internal or external causes. Okay, pro-social behavior. We're coming up to our last few slides here. So pro-social behavior, I guess the underpinning of it is, have you heard that sort of saying, sport builds good character? Now that is a bit of a contentious comment. What I mean by contentious is it's just like some people agree, some people don't agree. Now, what do you think? Do you think sport builds good character? Now, there's obviously examples of sport building great character, building very positive pro-social behavior. So think about when we help and when we share. Like, there's been a lot of good examples in the Olympics where someone falls down and another athlete in the race will help them get to the end of the line. However, people also can disagree with this comment and think about, contact sports, for example, bring out aggressive behavior. How many times have you seen a fight on the soccer pitch or during a rugby game where the players start punching each other? So there is also negative potential effects, antisocial behavior. So potential for competition to increase feelings of rejection and hostility. So does sport promote aggressive behavior? I guess it depends on the person, really. There's a really good example of the figure skater Tonya Harding. Now, she was going to the Olympics, and her competitor was a lady called Nancy Kerrigan. And Tonya Harding basically orchestrated for Nancy Kerrigan to be attacked before the Olympics, and someone broke into Nancy's house and broke her leg, like struck her on the knee and broke her leg. So definitely a negative behavior happening there, definitely some sort of antisocial behavior. So is that sport that brings it out in people? Is it already in them? It's a question that doesn't really have an answer. Okay, and then finally, are there any negative outcomes of exercise and physical activity? There's only a few I can think of. If you think of any more, let me know. But mainly exercise addiction or exercise dependence. We've spoken so much about how good exercise is, it's only fair to talk about potentially some of the negatives of exercise. So, oftentimes people confuse exercise addiction with exercise commitment. You can be committed to exercise and do all the training that you need to do, but exercise addiction is different. Exercise addiction is a negative motivation to exercise. There's a big relationship between exercise addiction and eating disorders as well, and female athletes in weight-restricted sports in particular are at the greatest risk of exercise addiction. So they're exercising not only for their sport, but also to lose weight, especially in these weight restricted sports like dancing is the only one that comes to mind right now. Another potential negative outcome is overtraining. So overtraining is where we do so much exercise that we actually have a decline in performance. And it's associated with many different negative symptoms: fatigue, lethargy, decreased motivation, poor concentration and sleep, and irritability. So you'll know if you're overtrained because your performance gets worse and it stays bad for a month. It's not just like you're really tired one day and you're not feeling good in the gym and your performance is worse. This is a sustained decrease in performance. It's a decrease in performance that lasts a long time. That's what overtraining is defined as. So it's not very common, overtraining. A lot of people use the term overtraining a little bit too loosely. It's very rare. It can occur, of course, where we just do too much that the body just wants to stop and doesn't perform as it should for a long time. But overtraining is another negative potential outcome of exercise. So a few things to consider there, but we have reached the end of our final unit for this subject.